you mentioned, in light of the evidence, there's still no evidence. I mean, because and I say this all the time to clients, because clients will get caught up in what you said, what people say on the internet, what people saying on the news. You see what they're saying about me on the news? You see what they're saying about me on Facebook? And I say, that's not evidence. That's just somebody sitting there on the toilet holding their telephone, typing away. That didn't count for anything, And, the fact that he has not been arrested means they still have no strong evidence. They may have a little bit more than they have before because, them saying that he wasn't a suspect, which is ridiculous. Of course he was a suspect. I said it before. What they meant was they did not have any evidence to justify him being a suspect, any evidence that tied him to the crime. What's good, people? Welcome back to the Legal Deep Dive. I am here in the club room with Kayla, and today's topic is something that exemplifies why it's important that non-lawyers ask me questions and pick the topics, because we're going to be talking about the case involving, who are we talking about, Kayla?
David.
And who's David again? He
is a rapper, and his Tesla was found with his 14-year-old girlfriend's body in the trunk.
And what's interesting is that before Kayla told me about this topic and this person, I had no idea who David is or was. I mean, that's a significant generational gap, which is why it's good that, that lay persons help pick the topics and the questions that are asked, because I would have never even thought about anything about who this guy is. And when I looked him up and I saw his name had a 4 in it, I'm like, why do you have a 4 in his name? That
no I?
Really? Oh, I see.
Where's the I?
I didn't notice that. So I'm going to get out of my comfort zone and start getting to the world of hip hop, because, I can do that because, I'm hip.
Okay. Rap.
Okay. Is rap? No, I thought it was called hip hop nowadays. I don't think it's called rap anymore.
Whatever it is.
It was rap when I was, at a different age. It was first started, it was rap, old school. Now it's referred to as old school rap, not just rap. But I'm pretty certain at this point it's called hip hop. So, I'm going to, fight you on that one.
Okay. Well, I'll probably lose anyway. But there's been a lot circling David and everything going on with his Tesla, his girlfriend, the body found in the trunk. So recently, one of his buddies, Neo Langston, who has been seen in many videos with him, pictures everywhere, they're like best friends, he did not appear in front of the grand jury as a witness and was arrested in his home, and his mother's home, actually.
Of course, because, most people in that industry don't have any money, They live at home with their parents for free, and then they get out and talk about how bad and cool they are. But so that makes sense.
I guess. Do you think he had something to hide, or what do you think the reason he would not appear in front of the grand jury as a witness would be?
A couple different reasons. I'm going to refer back to a TikTok I did on David at your suggestion a few months back. And, I said at that time that the way, if someone that is prosecuted and defended numerous homicides over the years of my career, I mean, the majority of homicides are not solved by forensic evidence or physical evidence like you think when you watch TV. You think, oh, they got a picture of a footprint or a candy wrapper, or some DNA at the scene, or that is not how the majority of homicides are solved.
Mm-hmm.
The majority of homicides are solved by individuals that have knowledge of the crime. They give statements. That is by far the most significant evidence that is used to solve homicides. And I said, when I heard about this case, that was how this case was going to break.
Mm-hmm. You did.
That something like this has not happened, and a lot of people who were close to the main suspect, in this case, David with a 4 and no I, people have to know about it and know what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what people may do in the beginning is, out of loyalty, keep their mouth shut because they freak out. They're loyal, or maybe, he's funding and financing everybody. So they keep their mouth shut because there are a lot of people involved in it, and I'm certain it's not just him. So they're protecting everybody, including themselves. But as I indicated, when I discussed it before, time is the enemy for the person that committed that crime, because over time, these people that have knowledge and or were involved, over time, their loyalties shift. They may decide that you're not being true to who you are anymore. They may decide that, oh, you think you're better than me now, or you're not doing enough for me after all I'm doing for you, or you should pay me more money. You should do more for me. You should do more for my family. All these things I'm doing to protect you. And hey, if it's like that, fine. I'm going to blow your spot up. You ain't so bad. You ain't so tough. You ain't nothing. And so they start talking. Or what can happen is, at the time, a lot of times, the more time that elapses after crime's committed and no one's been arrested, people tend to think they can get away with it and be a little more comfortable talking about it. And they'll be out with some people, maybe bragging about it, maybe dropping some hints, maybe they're having some drinks, getting high, and they're letting some things slip. And somebody hears about it, and that person starts talking. And that's when, the thread starts getting pulled and things start to unravel. So so I think either A, he's not talking because he has information, or B, as part of some code where, hey, I'm not a snitch. I might not know nothing, but I ain't talking to the cops. Or 3, if he's been arrested and the target of a criminal investigation, he knows to keep his mouth shut because something he says may incriminate himself.
Okay. And going back to the TikTok that you had made on him, you said that you were not convinced that he wasn't a suspect back when he was deemed not a suspect. He recently has been back added to the suspect list. And why do you think a lawyer would agree to defend him with all the evidence that there is out there? And I mean, technically, it's not confirmed, but with the key points that people are making all over the internet, it seems pretty likely.
Well, a couple different things. I mean, the reason a lawyer would agree to defend him is because he got the money to pay him. I mean, that's the job. I mean, if you do criminal cases and do criminal defense work, you take the case where they got the money to pay you. Mm-hmm. And what that means is you're taking cases where they're not just people that got a DUI or had some marijuana, or a college student that had alcohol. If you do criminal defense work, particularly if you handle violent crimes, I mean, you are taking cases that involve truly violent people that do horrible things. And that's just kind of part of the job. And everyone can't do that. I mean, there are lawyers that I know that do criminal defense work that say, hey, I don't represent people that commit murder. I can't do that. Or I don't represent people that commit crimes against children. I can't represent people that commit, sexual assaults, which is fine, because everybody can't do that. Because if you can't do that, if you cannot represent someone that's accused of murdering a child by child abuse, if you can't represent someone that's accused of dismembering a young girl, then you don't need to take the case. I mean, and that's fine. I'm not judging anybody. But at the end of the day, to answer your question very clearly, if he's got the money to pay him, they're going to take the case. Mm-hmm. And to address the second part of your question is, you mentioned, in light of the evidence, there's still no evidence. I mean, because and I say this all the time to clients, because clients will get caught up in what you said, what people say on the internet, what people are saying on the news. You see what they're saying about me on the news? You see what they're saying about me on Facebook? And I say, that's not evidence. That's just somebody sitting there on the toilet holding their telephone, typing away. Mm-hmm. That doesn't count for anything, And, the fact that he has not been arrested means they still have no strong evidence. They may have a little bit more than they have before, because, them saying that he wasn't a suspect, which is ridiculous. Of course he was a suspect. I said it before. What they meant was they did not have any evidence to justify him being a suspect, any evidence that tied him to the crime. And you may say, well, what do you mean she was found in his car? And yeah, that sounds bad. The fact that, that they found her in his car. But if I was offending David with a 4 and not an I would look to see, well, how many cars does he have? Because, certain rappers, and I'm probably going to draw some parallels to the Young Thug prosecution over the last year where he was actually found not guilty, the rapper. That, the mistakes people make is they will try to compare a rapper's life and circumstances to a normal life that they live.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, if so context-wise, how many cars do you have?
1.
Okay. So, yeah, if we found something in your car and you're the only person that drives it and no one else has access to it, and you got the only set of keys, yeah, it looks pretty bad. Okay? But if you're someone that has 7, 8 cars and you have all your, your hip hop friends and hangers on and your guys and your boy, I mean, and again, I'm not saying anything that's meant to be derogatory, but that lifestyle, you typically have, your boys, you have your group, you have your crew. And they typically, as part of the deal, you're on, and not just hip hop artists. I mean, most celebrities have an entourage, right? I mean, actors, professional athletes, I mean, football players, they have an entourage. People that they trust, people in their circle that follow them and they pay for them. They live with them. They do errands for them, and they will give them access to their stuff, access to their cars. And so it's not inconceivable that if you're a successful artist, I'll get away from just, saying he's a hip hop artist, but any kind of successful artist or athlete or person, you have an entourage, you have multiple cars, it's not uncommon. And I could guarantee you that some of the individuals that are in his entourage will say, yeah, he's got a bunch of cars. He lets us all drive them. No, he doesn't always ask where we're going. He doesn't know where we're going. And even if he does ask, and, somebody may say they're going one place and they leave and go someplace else and they have the car for a couple of days. So, I think there's a real good chance that in those circumstances, even though the body's found in his car, it's probably not his only car, and he's probably not the only person that had access to that car, which would be a good reason or a good indicator of why they didn't arrest him.
Okay, and going off of that with the one car,
Mm-hmm.
and the last time it was seen was a little bit down the street from David's house on the day before he was leaving for a San Francisco tour. It was never reported stolen, and then ended up in a yard where they found her in the trunk. What does that have? Does that have any hold on David's case, the fact that it wasn't reported stolen, and that, do you think it was just coincidence that the last day it was seen was the day before he left to go on a tour and be gone for a few months? I think it ended in August.
Well, I don't think it's a coincidence. I mean, I think what it comes down to is, like I said a minute ago, I mean, if that was the only car he had, and he was and he lived by himself, and no one else drove his car, and no one else had access to his car or keys to his car, then yeah, that is extremely troubling. But again, if the opposite is true, that's not his only car. There are other people that drive his car without his permission, probably.
Yeah.
Then you really can't make any strong connection to him and the vehicle. And I would assume that, law enforcement did the job in this case, and check for videos and you look for, if someone brings me on a homicide case, or any type of crime that occurred, in a residential area, or if it's going to be in a street or something like that. I mean, I have my private investigator go to the area and check like the location for ring cams, for example. A lot of people have ring cams, and there've been times I've been involved in cases where, there are ring cams in the area that cover the crime scene. It might be a car accident. I mean, I had one case, it was a murder. In some cases, in one case, I had a ring cam that actually didn't have the video of the shooting, but actually it was in the proximity of where the shooting occurred, and it had the audio of the entire shooting, like 14 shots. You check for street cameras and and things like that. They're the city cams they have, on covering the highways and streets. You check for that. You also, and this is something I do in cases, not just homicide cases, but in accident cases, for example, if there's an accident and there's a dispute about what happened. And even if there's not a dispute, I still want to kind of capture the severity of the accident. I'll have an investigator go, hey, check out that gas station, check out that laundromat. And literally I've had cases where a camera at a laundromat captured an accident where a car crashed into my client's vehicle and there was a big explosion, all captured real time, live. I've had cases where there's an accident at an intersection and law enforcement said there are no cameras, and my investigator finds a camera at a trailer near the intersection that literally had a camera externally outside the trailer pointing directly at the intersection. Mm-hmm. So I would assume law enforcement did their job. Now, if he hired me, I wouldn't make that assumption. If he'd hired me, I would assume that they didn't do their job, mm-hmm. and I would have my investigators recheck all that. But assuming they did their job, it's very clear they don't have any evidence or any video footage of anybody specifically with that vehicle that they can identify.
Mm-hmm. Going with that, you represent a lot of people in wrongful death cases. With the car last being seen, according to the internet, late July, and it being found in September, cameras lapse. It gets deleted after a certain amount of time. What could they do to find some sort of evidence? I mean, obviously there's the cameras, but why wasn't, how was this?
Yeah, I think, to find evidence, in a civil lawsuit versus a criminal case is going to be different. I've had individuals that have a loved one murdered, and they're not happy with the criminal investigation, and they want to hire me. And I say, okay, well, what do you want to hire me for? You don't hire me for the civil suit, or you hire me for something else. And you'd be amazed at the number of people that want to hire me to somehow, get involved in a criminal investigation. They'll say, we don't care about the money. We don't care about the civil suit. We just want this person brought to justice. We don't like the way the case is being handled, and we'll pay you and all that stuff. And I'll tell them, I cannot get involved in a criminal investigation. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can do an investigation, but I don't have any authority. You know what I mean? I can take whatever information I have to law enforcement and say, hey, I got a statement from this witness. Please look at it. But I can't tell them how to conduct their investigation. I can criticize it, and I can say, hey, why aren't you guys doing this? You ought to be doing this. How come you overlook this? Have you done this? Have you done a gunshot residue test? Have you checked this for fingerprints? Have you looked for cameras here? Have you checked this guy's phone records? I mean, I can tell them to do that, but I can't make them do that. And I cannot, decide when they have enough evidence in their mind to make an arrest or to bring somebody else in as a suspect or as a witness, or be tougher on that suspect, or, hey, give that guy a polygraph. I can't make them do that. And even if, you had the ability, or the family had the ability to pay me an unlimited amount of money to hire my own team of private investigators, my private investigators are not going to get the same voluntary cooperation from the community that law enforcement gets. You have my private investigator and he knocks on somebody's door and says, hey, I work for the John Mobley law firm, and, he represents his family trying to understand what's going on with this murder. You can get a lot of doors slammed in his face. Law enforcement shows up. They got a badge. They got the authority of the government. I mean, people feel a little more inclined to cooperate. So when I've had to explain that to clients, and then when they're frustrated that they've paid me and they're paying for this private investigator and they're not getting results, and I just said, well, they can't, go knock on somebody's door 7 days a week, mm-hmm. and try to make that person talk to them. Where law enforcement can show up, they got an army of people, they can show up and they can leave a business card and get a call back in 20 minutes. Yeah. Where my investigator shows up, leaves a business card and gets thrown in the trash can. We got nothing to say to you. We're not talking to you. My investigator can't threaten to get a search warrant and come back with a forensic team to examine the house and take photographs and take evidence for fingerprints and go through somebody's trash and we can't do that. Now, in a civil case, what I would do off the top of my head, and again, this is not a question I prepared an answer to, so I'm just giving you my perspective, without any preparation. Now, if they came to me and said, hey, we want to look at a wrongful death suit, then that changes. Because what I would do is, even though I don't have any strong evidence that David with a Ford, not with an I, actually committed the murder, well, it's his car, so I could sue him on a theory of negligence, saying that he was negligent in not monitoring his car, not monitoring the use of his car, not monitoring, the individuals that had access to this girl and, in this vehicle. And from there, once I file a lawsuit, I can start taking discovery. Mm-hmm. Okay. I can send out subpoenas and say, okay, well, I want all the cell phone numbers that you have, and literally the law will require them to give them to me, and then from there, I'm like, okay, well, who are your carriers? What are the numbers? And I could start, issuing subpoenas and requesting cell phone records from all the different carriers for all the different numbers, and see, okay, well, who were you texting around the time? Who were you calling around the time? And who else was present in that, who had access to your car? Mm-hmm. And now he's in a very difficult spot, because if I say, okay, in a civil context, who has access to your car, if he says he doesn't know, well, that just strengthens my case for negligence, because you don't even know who's got access to your car. Mm-hmm. So you're negligent and not managing that, and it's foreseeable that someone could use your car to commit a crime. If he gives me the names of people that have access to his car, okay, well, great. Now I can subpoena them. I can subpoena their phone records. I can depose them. And that's how I would start making headway, not necessarily to understand exactly what happened, but to build a case that there was some involvement. Mm-hmm. Now, you may recall a long time ago, or our listeners / viewers may recall the O.J. Simpson case, which was one I followed extensively. It was a hobby of mine, almost an obsession. And, based on the higher standard of proof in a criminal case, which is beyond reasonable doubt, he was found not guilty. But subsequent to that, he was sued in a civil case, which has a much lower standard of proof, which is by preponderance of the evidence, simply more likely than not. And he was actually found, from a civil standpoint, legally responsible for the deaths, mm-hmm. Same deaths that he was found not guilty of committing in the criminal trial. So that's how I would approach the case if a family came to me. I'd make sure they understood what I could not do and explain what I could do. And if they wanted to hire me from that standpoint, I proceed in that fashion.
And jumping back, kind of related to the lifestyle topic that you mentioned, I've seen all over TikTok, and I know that this isn't evidence. I just kind of want to get your perspective on it. A bunch of people are posting about how his lyrics are kind of like a confession or leading up to the murder, how he was kind of thinking about it. He did say in an interview that he wanted people to take every single lyric seriously and really dive in to the meaning of the songs. And there are tons of songs. I mean, one says, I killed you in the back of my mind. I didn't even regret it. I'm the only reason you're still breathing. There was one video where he was actually the killer and the victim, and he put his own dead body into the car of a trunk. It was released in March of 2025. So before any of this even really came up. And a bunch of people are convinced that this can be used, against him, because he said he wants his music to be a soundtrack into his life. He wants people to see into his brain. Why or why not could this be used in a trial? Do you think that this has any power? I mean, everybody is so convinced that he's full on just telling everybody what exactly is going on and that this should be looked into.
I think if you look back historically, people have always done that with music. Mm-hmm. They've always, they did it with the Beatles. This song has some kind of hidden meaning. I'm the walrus. I'm like, John Lennon.
Play it backwards.
Exactly. And sometimes maybe, yeah, but most times artists say no. You ever heard of that band called the Eagles? That probably before your time, but they have a very, very famous popular song called The Hotel California.
Yeah.
And a lot of the lyrics in that song, people say, yeah, that song, they're talking about the devil and the Antichrist and all that, because they're talking about, the spirit, and they can't stab, his pointing knife, and they just can't kill the beast, and all. They're like, oh yeah, they're talking about, the Antichrist and devil and the hell, and the hotel's a metaphor for hell and all that stuff. They're like, no, it's a metaphor for Los Angeles, So, I think people always tend to do that. I think that doesn't work for a couple of different reasons. One, I think that, you are what you're doing is you're isolating and fixating on a small number of songs that an artist has generated hundreds or 50 or 60 different songs. You want to kind of pick on 2 or 3 or 4 and go, see, look at these lyrics.
Mm-hmm.
The lyrics in these 2 or 3 songs, that tells you what he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's problematic because then you start looking at the lyrics of all the other songs. I mean, he's talking about loving his mom and loving God and how peace, everybody should have peace. I mean, are you going to, put any weight on those lyrics too? Or just the ones that are consistent with this little theory you have? And I think in that same scope, he's not the only, I don't listen to a whole lot of hip hop music anymore, but I can guarantee you he's not the first or the only artist to make songs like that. Eminem did that, for example. There are a lot of rappers that talked about, or, and hip hop artists that rap lyrics like that. And, I think that when prosecutors try to start using rappers or hip hop or musicians' lyrics in the criminal prosecutions, I think ultimately they end up looking extremely foolish. And I'm going to refer to the criminal prosecution of the hip hop artist or musician, the Young Thug. And the prosecution had put up all this evidence and had all these theories about, why he was responsible for this crime that got committed, and the people there, that committed this crime were wearing his logos and driving his cars and, and his brand and all that, like sort of like it was a gang almost. Mm-hmm. Like, see, he had control over them. They had tattoos, his soldiers. And what came out in trial is that plenty of people wore his stuff because he's a popular artist. People he didn't even know, wore his logos and had tattoos about him and his merch. And again, like I indicated, he had an entourage of people that he let stay with him. They were not even, part of his crew, but hey, this person in the community is having a difficult time. Let's give him a place to stay. So what reason prosecutors can look foolish, in my opinion, is because when they start delving into that area, they're delving into a world that they don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
They have a certain way of life, a certain viewpoint. And when they see this other lifestyle, they make judgments and jump to conclusions based on their world and based on their worldview. And they try to take the facts and circumstances from a lifestyle they know nothing about and try to fit it into a theory of evidence for a criminal prosecution. And they look foolish. And that's what happened in the Young Thug trial, because all the witnesses they put up in that case to try to portray him as some type of, thug gang leader, guru, these same people were talking about all the stuff he did in the community. He helped empower the community and he gave money to people. And hey, this person needed a ride to work. He let them use their card, no charge, no questions asked, and was helping all these people out. And they just look foolish because my answer is, I think that's a big mistake by prosecutors, because you can't just not be a part of that world and try to start picking and choosing little parts of lyrics.
Even though he said in an interview he wanted everybody to take all of his lyrics seriously, almost every single one of his songs has a fascination with murder, somehow involved. Something with killing somebody, something about death. And he said that he wanted everybody to take it literally into a soundtrack of his life, like his brain. Yeah. He wanted people to see it to it.
Yeah, and there's a guy named Vanilla Ice a long time ago that swore he lived this hard, rough life on the streets, and got stabbed in the gang. And of course, you may not recall because that was before your time, but everybody found that it was all a lie. I mean, I think you would all agree with me that part of having success as a young hip hop artist is and having authenticity is being this damaged person with this rough life that has all this anger. That's the appeal.
Mhm.
That's what draws, the authenticity to your music, your rage, your rough life, all the violence that's been a part of your life, all the crime that's been against you, all the drugs, you've been a part of. That's kind of part of the gimmick. And I'm certain, and again, that's not my world, okay? But I am certain that everyone would agree that a number of hip hop artists manufacture that as part of their authenticity and as part of their brand, so they can do what? Sell more records or more downloads. I mean, and that's what people want. They want, if this same guy was saying, hey, my name's David with a V and an I, and I go to school and say my prayers and take my vitamins, but I'm gonna start singing some true hardcore hip hop songs for you today. Nobody'd buy it. They think, who the hell are you? What do you know?
Yeah.
So, hey, what do you got? You got to get some tats. You got to hang out with some rough people. And you got to talk about living that life.
And what do you think about the music video where he's dragging a dead body and puts it in the trunk?
I think that, that's not my taste. But at the end of the day, there's something in the rules of evidence that called, Rule 403. There are two rules. There's 403 and there's either 401 or 402. But the first one is called relevance. Okay. If he was on trial for this murder, okay, how is it relevant? Relevant means it makes it more or less likely that he committed the crime. So at some point in time, well before this body was found in the trunk, he created a similar visual in a video. Okay. Does that tie him to the crime? No, because he's made numerous videos, engage in numerous types of activity. But again, you want to try to point to one, 3 or 4 second scene out of hundreds of hours of videos and content and try to connect that to a crime. And the second prong of the rules of evidence that I would refer to is something called Rule 403. And that's where the court has to determine whether or not, even if something is relevant, whether or not the risk of prejudice substantially outweighs the probative value. So what that means is, yeah, it may have prove a little bit of something that may be interesting, or I could see why you want that in, but we can't let a jury see this because they're going to think, oh my God, this guy, horrible, and convict him because he's a horrible person and depicted a video of him committing violence on a young girl as opposed to whether or not there's any evidence he committed the crime. And that's what can happen when you let in evidence like that. And in my opinion, the judge wouldn't let it in.
Earlier, we discussed his friend, Neo Langston, and how he failed to appear in front of the grand jury as a witness. Well, about 2 days ago, he did go in front of them. He was in the courtroom, gave his witness statement, and it was only about 40 minutes. What do you make about this after, talking about his statement earlier?
I really can't express an opinion on that because as I indicated in other podcasts, grand jury proceedings are secret. So if I was David's attorney, for example, in this case, and the prosecutors have impaneled a grand jury, I don't have any right to know when they're taking somebody before the grand jury, who they're taking, or what is said to the grand jury. It's a complete secret proceeding. So it's impossible to form an opinion on the value of that testimony or how it impacts the case because he could have been there for 40 minutes and said nothing and said, I don't know. I don't remember. Or he could have been there for 40 minutes and said, I did it. I'm cooperating. This who was there. David did this. This other person did this. Or Sometimes a witness or a suspect may not have enough information to put a nail in the coffin, but they can give information that's some piece of the puzzle. So it's really impossible, due to the nature of the secret proceedings of grand jury, to form an opinion as to the impact of his testimony. Well, I think that's it for today. Thank you, Kayla. Thank everybody for joining us on the Legal Deep Dive here in the club room. And I've got some strong opinions about this case, about the evidence, about the rapper, the artist. You may not agree with my opinions, but I really don't give a damn. Either way, do me a favor, hit like and subscribe, and post your comments and call it like you see it. That's it. Well, that's all I got, but I do appreciate you taking the time to join me on this legal deep dive. I think it's always fun to discuss these topics, tell you what I think, and get your feedback. I would really appreciate it if you took the time to like the video, subscribe to the podcast, and also I'd appreciate you sending me your comments so we can discuss the topics you want to hear about. That's it.